The book of Ruth is surely one of the most beautiful stories in the Bible and one of the most spectacular in terms of its timeless message about persistent love. The story is only 4 chapters long. In most Bibles, it takes up but 3 pages. It requires 10 or 15 minutes of time to read the whole book from beginning to end. I hope, therefore, that you will go home and read the entire dramatic story for yourself. But I'm happy to give you a Cliff's Note version. The story begins in Bethlehem with a Jewish man named Elimelech. His wife's name is Naomi, and together they have 2 boys, Mahlon and Chilion. It is quite rare to find a family like this in the Bible. Monogamy is not exactly the order of the day in the Old Testament, and usually there are many more children than 2. But this family is configured just like the one in Leave It to Beaver. There is a famine in the land of Judah where Bethlehem is situated, so together Elimelech, Naomi, Mahlon, and Chilion leave their home and move to a foreign country, to the land of Moab, on the other side of the Dead Sea where food is plentiful. Life does improve in Moab. This Jewish family settles in among the Moabites, but then unexpectedly Elimelech dies. Naomi and her two boys stay right there in the land of Moab, where Mahlon and Chilion grow into young men and marry Moabite women. Sadly, tragedy strikes twice more when both sons die, widowing all 3 women, Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law, whose names are Ruth and Orpah. At this point in the story, Naomi could insist that her daughters-in-law stay by her side, care for her into old age, and devote their lives to her keeping. It would be well within her rights to demand such. In fact, when Naomi makes the decision to pack up her grief, her bitter grief, go home to Bethlehem in the land of Judah, Orpah and Ruth gather up their things and leave with her. But Naomi sets her daughters-in-law free. She gives them the liberty to go back, to go home to their own mothers, to go back to Moab, and she encourages them to get on with their lives. We talked about this kind of love 2 weeks ago, a love that seeks freedom for the beloved. Naomi sets Ruth and Orpah free, offering them a beautiful blessing. She says, "May God be as kind to you as you have been to me. May God grant you security and a new life with a new family." Orpah kisses Naomi and turns back for the land of Moab. But Ruth, we read, clings to Naomi and makes the decision to go with her to Bethlehem, to stay with her mother-in-law. With courageous and persistent love, Ruth avows, "Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." This is the language of covenant love. The language of promise, the language of persistence. "I'm not leaving you," says Ruth to Naomi. Although these words are spoken by a daughter-in-law to a mother-in-law, they are often used in weddings and applied to the covenant of marriage, where you go, I will go, where you live, I will live, your people will be my people, your God, my God. What gave Ruth that persistent love, a love that led her to leave everything she knew, to depart from her own people, her own culture, her own Moabite God, her own language and food and customs, and head into a foreign land to live among a foreign people with her mother-in-law. I think that for Ruth, this was a divine calling of global proportions, but as is so often the case, hers is a love that starts quite locally with a particular person, with Naomi. Clearly, Naomi has been a very kind and caring mother-in-law. Both of her daughters-in-law are kind and loving in return. It was, however, a great act of sacrificial love for Naomi to set them free, to invite them to move on, to offer them a parting blessing, and to encourage them to go back and find a couple of nice Moabite men and start over again. This selfless act causes the daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, to cry out in protest. No, they say, we want to go with you. Naomi is someone who has been such a blessing to them. They want to follow her. They want to be held forever in her loving embrace. In the end, Naomi persuades Orpah to return to her own family, but Ruth cannot be convinced. She wants what she sees in Naomi. She wants the whole package. She wants the kindness, the courage, the faith, the love. Ruth's persistent love starts with Naomi's magnanimous love. Ruth is sticking with Naomi wherever this leads. She may not know anything about Bethlehem or the land of Judah, but she knows Naomi. For Ruth, love is knowing where you belong and to whom. Indeed, one word for faithfulness, it's translated in a variety of ways because it's a complicated word. We don't have an exact translation, but one word we find throughout the Hebrew scriptures is a word that is pronounced chesed, which means it's sometimes translated as loving kindness, and sometimes it's translated as faithful love or persistent love, a love that will not let you go. So in the ancient Hebrew world, faith and love are just all of a piece. Where we find chesed in the first two chapters of Ruth, it is in reference to God. Indeed, chesed is said to be the defining characteristic of God, who demonstrates to us a kind and faithful love. In the third chapter, however, this word, chesed, is used to describe Ruth. It's an honor. As you may know, and to complete the Cliff's Note version of the story, Ruth follows Naomi back to Bethlehem, where she falls in love with an energetic older man named Boaz. Eventually they marry, and Ruth bears a son named Obed, who becomes the light of their lives and certainly the light of Naomi's life. But before all that, when Boaz first starts sidling up to Ruth, and it does go both ways, Ruth wants to know why he would be so nice to a foreigner. I'm just a poor immigrant who gathers leftover corn in your fields, she says. Why would you be so nice to me? While there were undoubtedly physical attributes that captured his imagination, Boaz tells Ruth that he admires what she has done. Whereas some natives of Bethlehem might use her immigrant status to belittle or to taunt Ruth, Boaz acknowledges that leaving her native land, leaving her own family in order to befriend and care for her mother-in-law, Naomi, was no small sacrifice and is in fact admirable. Boaz is attracted to Ruth's persistent love. The book of Ruth was probably written in the time of Nehemiah, that's around 500 BC, a little bit earlier. Nehemiah, for whom another book of the Bible is named, brought about many reforms designed to bring the Hebrew people together again. But he was also a bit of a xenophobe. He did not like outsiders. He created laws that prohibited intermarriage between Jews and anyone else who might be in the area. He kicked out all foreigners, even those who were already married to Jews. It was during this period of the Hebrew history when they were striving for racial purity or bucking up against it that the book of Ruth emerged to remind the Hebrew people that God's family extends all the way to Moab and beyond. The book of Ruth is a bold challenge to Nehemiah, providing evidence that there are no pure bloodlines and that love eclipses race any day of the week. In fact, Ruth, a Moabite woman, would eventually become the great-grandmother of King David. King David was descended from the Moabites? Shocking. This would be like the English acknowledging that their royal family is, in fact, German. Or the Pashtuns accepting the fact that not only are they of Persian descent, but there is a lot of Chinese blood running through their veins. Or Adolf Hitler, Mr. Superior Pure Race, admitting that his great-grandmother was Jewish, which is true. So this is a story that functions on many levels. It's a story about people choosing to love one another persistently through thick and thin when they do not have to. It is a never give up story, and if you think your life is over, think again story. It is a persistent love story. It is also an immigration story that challenges contempt for foreigners and lifts up the boundlessness of God's love. It is an important national saga for the Hebrew people that continues to speak for all people today. It is a love story, a sacrificial chesed love story. And I saw something new in the story this time around. In a few months, when I retire, you'll be moving on without me. You'll be Ruth and Naomi moving to fresher fields and new possibilities. You'll move on, and I'll be Orpah heading home. I'm sure that Orpah continued to love Naomi and Ruth from a distance. I like to think that Orpah thought of them often and prayed for them regularly. Like Orpah, I will surely continue to love you, to think of you often, and to pray for you all the time. But let us set Orpah aside for now and end with Ruth, brave Ruth. May God bless you with chesed, so that your love may be like that of Ruth, kind and persistent, courageous and caring, bold and boundless. Amen.